No problem. So we found Lubin and lost Fernandez, I think. You're good to go? Okay. Everybody settle in?
Yes.
Richardson's coming up.
Yes, we do have an issue that we want to readdress.
All right, so if everybody quiet down, here we go. We're going to officially start, and there's an issue. Defense, what's the issue?
The issue, Your Honor, is whether or not this witness,
And who is it?
Dr. Stephen Nelson,
Okay,
medical examiner in Polk County, originally from here,
I remember.
and the court had made an earlier ruling that we would not be allowed to refer to the fact that the state initially hired him and placed him on the witness list. Your Honor, I only have, unfortunately, 2 copies of the...
They were turned over to the state when the memo was filed.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then I have for the court. May I approach this?
Yes.
Thank you. The, absolutely. Milburn versus State, which is at 742 Southern 2nd, 362. Broward County versus Cento, that's C-E-N-T-O, at 611 Southern 2nd, 1339. And Williams versus State, 397 Southern 2nd, 1049.
Now, it's interesting that you handed me Williams, because I prepped this previously, and as I started with the state's motion, which seems like a very long time ago, on another important issue in the case, I always go right to Earhart. And the black letter law, and I'm going to be open to hearing why this is distinguishable, but the black letter law is, quote, "The fact that the expert was originally retained by the adverse party is inadmissible to bolster the credibility of the expert." And the interesting part is they cite Milburn, the case you just handed me. So I'm curious to see what you're saying here.
Yes, because the 1993 case of Broward County versus Cento, which I've handed to the court, is distinguishes. I'm not sure what Professor Earhart cites in his treatise. He may have cited the Sun Charm Ranch, Inc. versus Orlando case, which is a second DCA case,
He does.
Fifth DCA case. And
Okay, go ahead.
may I proceed?
Yes, sir.
That the Sun Charm Ranch, which is a 50 CA case, stands for that proposition. But the Fourth District Court of Appeal in the most recent case, which is Cento, Broward County versus Cento, says they disagree. And in that case, bottom of the first page, going on to the second page, says, in Sun Charm, a condemnee, I guess this was an eminent domain case, a condemnee was not allowed to ask an expert witness whether he had been hired by the condemnor city in connection with the condemnation case. The expert was hired only as a consulting expert. He was not hired or named as a trial expert. Jacksonville Transportation Authority followed Sun Charm, holding that the condemnee improperly suggested that the condemnor had hired an expert and then failed to use him. The expert had been retained by the condemnor but had not been named as a trial witness. In this case, Broward County, in this case, the Cento case, Broward County hired and named Dr. Wahlquist as a trial witness. He was named as, Dr. Nelson was consulted by the state and named as a trial witness. We took his deposition as he was a state witness. His opinion differs markedly, as markedly as can be, from Dr. Just. And the fact that he was hired by the state and listed as a trial witness by the state should be the distinguishing factors.
Has this been? See, there's a subsequent case, this is why I'm pausing on it, because, and to me, it makes sense. So, it appears there's a split. Now, if I'd known this was coming up again, I would have delved a little deeper, but there seems to be a split amongst
And for
the,
the state, Your Honor, because this is the first part of it being brought up.
well, actually, it was brought up in your motion
It was.
and I-
ruled upon,
and ruled upon, and,
And nothing else after that, as far as being an issue, even after in-depth conversations about each witness testifying, nothing about it.
all right, well, welcome to being a trial judge. So these things happen on the fly sometimes, and I'm not, it's hard for me because I want to make the best decision. And I think you can tell in this case, I did a lot of work every time we had an issue before we got into court, so I could sound really smart, which we know is not true. Here's the deal. So there, it does appear to be a split, but I think if you look at later cases, like a 2002 case, that actually kind of puts a little more meat on the bone. If the state was to attack your expert's credentials as an expert, that he's not qualified to be an expert, that would open the door then to say, oh, really? You hired him, or you attempted to hire him. The state consulted with this expert?
Yes, Your Honor.
And listed him as an expert and provided it to the court and imposed him as a state witness.
Is that factual?
Yes, we list him as a witness, they deposed him, that's correct, Your Honor. And we don't dispute his qualifications as a medical examiner, which is right along the same lines as yours. Once again, is inappropriate bolstering, irrelevant as to the testimony that he's providing. And Ms. Cox has a more in-depth part, if it's necessary, Your Honor.
Give me one moment to look at something here. All right. Can you scroll, give me the case. Everybody criticizes that standalone Fourth District Court of Appeal case and says the reasoning is a little bit different. And from all my experience, that it's just, it seems to be an anomaly, that case. So there's a later case that they even say we criticize we don't disagree with the result of the Cento case, that it was affirmed, and it was a personal injury case. But Bogosian versus State Farm, which is the third DCA case, 817 Southern 2nd, 968. Listen, I think it's a complete distraction from what's actually happening. So, and that's a personal injury case where the expert and the side that originally retained him then took a completely different position that was articulated, i.e. that there was a permanent injury that's required in civil cases to make that finding, whether it was the injury is permanent or not. So I'm going to stand by my original ruling with respect to the defense. I'm going to stand by my original ruling that it would be inappropriate to mention in front of the jury that Dr. Nelson had been originally retained and listed by the state. Okay, so are we ready to bring him in?
And can we just make sure that the witness is specifically instructed so that he doesn't make any statements such as
Why
that?
don't we send out one of the lawyers to grab the witness and make sure that they instruct him?
I so instructed him, but we can.
Just double check.
But in light of the Fourth District case, would you reconsider us being allowed to call a second expert.
Okay, I'm going to stand on my ruling on that as well. Okay, all right, let's bring in the jury. Okay, defense, call your next witness.
Stephen Nelson.
The defense calls Dr. Stephen Nelson, please. Doctor, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Judge.
Come on up to Deputy Dunkley right here. When you get there, if you'd raise your right hand and face Mr. Clerk for us.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do.
And doctor, you're going to have a seat right up there. Chair swivels, it rolls. Get it where you're happy. Most importantly for me, though, is you get that microphone pretty close to your mouth and talk directly into it. And once you've done all that, if you would tell us your full name and slowly spell it for us.
I'm Dr. Stephen Nelson, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, N-E-L-S-O-N.
You may proceed.
And by the way, the base also slides, so you don't have to lean forward if you do that. What is your occupation, Dr. Nelson?
I'm the Chief Medical Examiner for the 10th Judicial Circuit of Florida, which is Polk, Hardy, and Highlands counties in Central Florida.
For how long have you been the Chief Medical Examiner?
Since 1996, 1997.
Could you tell us a little bit about your occupation, about your education?
In order to be a medical examiner, you have to be a physician, MD. After medical school, you train in pathology. There are various subspecialty areas in pathology. The groundwork foundation in pathology is anatomic pathology that deals with hospital pathology. An anatomic pathologist examines surgical specimens that are removed, whether they be a breast biopsy, lymph nodes, appendix, to see if they contain infection or tumor, cancer. After that, then you choose to subspecialize in areas of pathology. The two areas that I've chosen to subspecialize in is neuropathology. So after anatomic pathology, it's a 2-year fellowship in neuropathology. Both my anatomic pathology and neuropathology were done at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York City. After that, I came to Florida for a fellowship in forensic pathology at the University of Miami, and that is a 1-year fellowship. Subsequent to that, I was an associate medical examiner in Broward County, briefly here in Palm Beach County for about 3 years, and then the position of chief opened in the office that I am currently at, and I have been there since, as I say, 1996, 1997 as chief.
Can you please tell us what forensic pathology is?
Essentially, how pathology interacts with the law. Quincy, television program, Dr. G, another television program, those are medical examiners. Florida does not have a coroner system, so all of the medical examiners here in Florida are physicians, and they're specialty trained in forensic pathology.
Do you hold any position with the state?
Yes, I'm the chairman of the State Medical Examiners Commission. It's a gubernatorial appointment. It's housed within the Department of Law Enforcement, our state police agency, and it describes how medical legal death investigation is conducted in the state. It provides regulation on how that's conducted. It also provides discipline when somebody falls outside of the bounds.
For how long have you held that position?
This is my second term on that, so it's been a number of years, probably cumulative close to 20-some years.
So cumulative through a number of governors?
Yes,
It's a gubernatorial appointment?
correct.
Did you also have a period of time where you worked in the New York City Medical Examiners?
Yes, I was with the New York City Medical Examiner's Office as well as the Westchester County Medical Examiner's Office, which is the county immediately north of the 5 boroughs of New York City. I did that while I was doing my neuropathology fellowship in New York City.
Can you estimate how many times you've appeared in court as an expert in pathology?
In court, hundreds of times.
Can you estimate is there any way to estimate how many autopsies you've performed?
No, I don't keep tabs on that, but easily thousands.
How many medical examiners do you have working under you?
One other in my office.
Now, you're aware of what the issue here is. It's whether or not Mr. Jones could have run 40 or 50 yards after receiving the injury to the heart that he received.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And have you read and reviewed and studied the autopsy report and photographs?
Yes.
First, let me get the opinion, and then I'm gonna go into some of your explanations, okay? So, could Mr. Jones have run the 40 or 50 yards in question subsequent to, afterwards, that he received the injury to his heart?
The short answer is yes, he could have.
How clear is the literature on that?
I think it's quite clear. I authored a 6-page letter that reviews the literature with regard to this very specific point. And anyone who's a hunter knows that if you shoot an animal, the animal takes off running and has a period of time before the animal will collapse. There are also numerous articles in the medical literature that talk of this very point of the unusual things that people are capable of doing, either by being shot or stabbed in their heart. So this is pretty much settled science. This is not something that's an aberration. It's well documented in the literature.
And has it been for a long time?
Yes, it has for the long time. I think the oldest article that I was able to find in the literature was from the 1800s.
So for at least that long, has this been something that was taught in when you were studying for the boards, for example?
Yes, it's certainly documented in the 2 main textbooks that we use for board certification exams in forensic pathology. And those 2 examples of textbooks have examples in those textbooks of this very topic.
So speaking of textbooks, are you familiar with Gunshot Wounds, 3rd edition by Vincent DeMaio?
Yes, that would be a very big authoritative textbook on gunshot wounds.
And is it pretty much internationally recognized as an authority on gunshot wounds?
In forensic pathology, yes.
And are you familiar with the 4th edition of Medico-Legal Investigation of Death by Spitz and Fisher?
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, you have those books in your library.
Yes, I think most medical examiners do.
Now, Dr. Just gave an example from DeMaio's book about a shotgun wound to the heart. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. You're familiar with the literature on as to what Dr. DeMaio has said about that injury?
Yes.
Okay. So she referred to it yesterday, and she said, she was quoting from this section, an individual received a shotgun blast that literally shredded the heart, yet this individual was able to run 65 feet prior to collapsing. Such activity is not surprising. Do you agree with?
Absolutely.
Now, she distinguished a close-range shotgun blast from a close-range .40 caliber shot. Please talk about that.
Apples and oranges. I think in the textbook there with DeMaio, the estimated range of fire is about 3 feet, if I'm correct. So at 3 feet, a shotgun blast, all of the pellets, no matter whether it's birdshot, buckshot, snake shot, they all come out together. So the caliber of the bore of the shotgun is what is striking the body at about 3 feet. It is not individual pellet spread. Pellet over here, pellet over here, pellet over here. You don't get individual pellet spread until you're about 6 feet away from the muzzle target distance. So when this is this close, 3 feet or so that DeMaio describes in his book, with a shotgun wound to the chest that shreds the heart, it's essentially a core wound of the diameter of the barrel of the shotgun, making a hole through the person's chest, through their heart, shredding their heart. It's not individual pellets. It's all of these pellets in a nice, tight pattern that make that hole through the chest and heart.
So in DeMaio's reference to that particular injury, I mean, there are others, but in DeMaio's reference to that particular injury, was the injury received there as devastating as the injury received here?
Even more so.
Even more so?
Yes.
Okay. How so?
This wound in DeMaio's text describes the heart as being shredded. Dr. Juice did not describe Corey Jones' heart as being shredded. She described where the bullet goes through Corey Jones' heart, but it's not shredded. So this wound that Dr. DeMaio's described in his textbook on gunshot wounds is far worse than Corey Jones' gunshot wound. The shotgun wound is far worse than the gunshot wound in the heart, and he was able to do amazing things after receiving a shotgun wound to the heart.
What's the issue here? Is it damage to the heart or oxygen to the brain?
Well, the oxygen to the brain part is standard. All of us sitting here taking this in are using brain metabolism at a certain level. It doesn't change. If we're computing trig or algebra problems, our amount of metabolism that our brain is using is no more increased. If we're running a marathon, the metabolism in our brain is no more increased. It's constant. So the metabolism, the energy supply in your brain is roughly maybe 10, maybe the outside of maybe 15 seconds of time. So even when we shred the heart with a shotgun blast to the heart or injure the heart with this kind of devastating wound that Corey Jones has, Corey Jones is still able to get that 10 to 15 seconds of brain activity to get him to move, even though he has damage to the pump.
So what would be the kind of the outer limit on how long or how far somebody could run?
Well, he's in good shape. He's a young 31-year-old man. He should be able to cover that distance, that 40-yard distance.
And what happens after the 10 to 15 seconds of brain activity? What then happens?
He's run out of gas, both the gas for his brain as well as presumably the blood that is necessary to circulate to provide more energy to his brain.
Now, are you able to determine whether Mr. Jones's heart actually continued to pump based on anything in the autopsy report?
Yes, no,
after he received the injury?
Yes, it continued to pump after the injury. Mr. Jones has, by Dr. Juice's characterization, he has 1,000 liters of blood in his right chest cavity and 400 liters that she was able to recover in his left chest cavity. So that's 1,400 cc's of blood that she was able to recover. There's probably more in there that she was not able to measure with a ladle.
And what that means is that that blood in the chest cavity was pumped out after the injury occurred?
That is correct.
And what is the rate of pumping? In other words, how much with each pump of the heart how much blood do you pump?
Your cardiac output is your heart rate multiplied by the cardiac volume. And the cardiac volume, most people's heart can contain about 100 cc's of blood. You never pump out 100 cc's every time the heart pumps. What you get is about somewhere between 55 and 75 cc's of blood that gets pumped out, and that's called the ejection fraction. So if you've ever had an echocardiogram, that's what the ejection fraction is. It's the percentage of blood that's pumped out with every beat of the heart. And as I say, it is never, even in the most marathon runner, it is never 100%. So the average heart contains about 100 cc's of blood. A stroke volume for that somewhere in the neighborhood of 55 to 75 cc's. You can do the calculation as to what that would take. It's comfortably above 10 seconds to get that blood there.
So in other words, we're not now talking about the 10 seconds of oxygen to the brain. We're talking about for at least how long the heart was pumping after the horrible injury.
Correct, to fill the chest with that kind of blood. And as I say, that's an estimate from Dr. Juice. There most likely is even more blood that she was unable to recover.
So using her conservative estimate, you would divide 70, which is how much you get with a pump, a good estimate, whether it's 60 or 70, you would have
Correct,
divided 70
correct.
into 1,400
Yes,
to determine how many pumps of the heart you would get.
that's correct.
So if you multiplied it by 10 pumps, it would be 700. If you multiplied it by 20, it would be 1,400 cc's.
Correct.
Which is how much blood was in the heart.
That's correct. But that, as you said, that doesn't take into account that he's got about 10, maybe 15 seconds of brain activity ready to go. But once he collapses from his lack of further brain activity, that doesn't mean that his heart is stopped at that time either.
So his heart may or may not have been stopped, but it was not pumping the blood to where it was supposed to go.
That is correct.
All right. So I want to ask you whether this is an anomaly, what DeMaio talks about, or whether the literature is filled with those anecdotes.
The literature is filled with those anecdotes. And again, the longer that you do this type of work, you're no longer surprised at what people are capable of doing after suffering significant, devastating injuries to their heart. I'm not talking about a head wound. A head wound will end the matter immediately with a shot to the head, producing damage to the brain. Talking about damage to the pump, the heart. And as I say, the longer you do this kind of work, you are no longer surprised at what you find. We see examples like this on a yearly basis.
In your office?
Yes.
As a matter of fact, in your office, we won't mention names, of course, but did you recently, did your office recently autopsy an employee of another medical examiner's office?
Yes, we autopsied an employee from another medical examiner's office. That medical examiner obviously had a conflict in doing an autopsy on one of their own employees. The employee had been shot by his estranged wife inside of their front door area of their condo, was able to turn, run down steps, about 12 feet of steps, lives next to the water, so this is an elevated condo on stilts. Run next door to the next condo, up the same high steps, 12 some feet of steps, knocks on the door of the next door neighbor, keeps knocking on the door until the next door neighbor comes to the door for the knocks, opens the door, he stumbles in and collapses in the entryway. So 12 feet down, another 12 or so feet across, another 12 feet up, knocking on the door, times taking place, and collapses. And at autopsy, he was shot with a .40 caliber gun, the same type of gun that Corey Jones is shot with. Same kind of injury to his heart, not shredded like a shotgun wound, but similar injury to his heart. And again, if you didn't know the history, the historical information provided, that he was able to do all these things, and you just thought he collapsed at some neighbor's door and maybe he was shot from the ground up, you wouldn't know any better as to what he's capable of doing, or what he did do, not just is capable of doing, but what he actually did do.
So is there an issue here, though, about dropping of blood pressure or fainting affecting the ability to run?
Well, when we have an issue like this where someone is shot, we have fight or flight. So this is a part of the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, that kicks in, pumps out massive amounts of adrenaline that you need to either fight or flight. You either need to stay there and fight, or you need to flee and get away. The opposite of that is feed or breed, where after you've had a heavy meal, your blood pools to your gut to digest that heavy meal, you feel sleepy, that's feed or breed. We're talking here about fight or flight. So when that happens, we have more adrenaline that kicks in to be able to produce that extra oomph for him to do that. So it's not like he's just waking up from a nap and has this injury where fight or flight has not kicked in. We know what's happened in the seconds before this for him to turn and attempt to run.
So, again, just for clarity on that point, I'll summarize what she said. What the doctor was saying was that, well, yes, but this person would suffer a sudden loss in blood pressure and would suffer dizziness, and that's why the person would not be able to.
Well, that answer does not take into account fight or flight, nor does it take into account that we've still got this 10, 15-second reserve of the brain to act.
So in other words, the 10 to 15 seconds of the brain, of competent brain activity, I'll call it, is the opposite of what happens after that, after the 10 to 15 seconds.
Yes.
Is her opinion an outlier in this?
I think it's just that we don't have a grasp of the literature. I don't think she has a grasp of the literature.
Now, you've mentioned the Vincent DeMaio book. I want to mention the Spitz book again. Are you familiar with Spitz's book?
Again, that's a standard text that I would dare say 100% of medical examiner offices around the country have that book. It's a classic. It's one of the main teaching textbooks for forensic pathology, along with DeMaio.
And speaking of which, you mentioned that an injury to the brain is different.
Yes, injury to the brain is very much different.
So, how do I say that? You've mentioned anecdotal stories. I mean, are they numerous, or is it just the one story that you gave as an example from another doctor's office?
No, they're numerous. They're so numerous that they've made their way into a textbook. This isn't something that somebody has just said, oh, I had one case of this, and let me talk about it at a cocktail party. This is something that there are enough cases that it's now settled science, and it's in textbooks. Textbooks have examples after examples of this phenomenon.
And are two of those textbooks the ones we've mentioned here with Spitz and Fisher and Vincent DeMaio?
Yes, they are.
Would this be a question that you would have to know the answer to in the boards of forensic?
May very well be. May very well be.
You'd have to know this if you were a forensic pathologist?
Yes, and as I say, the longer you do this, there are all kinds of things that surprise us. But again, it's in not one, it's in at least two textbooks that are big textbooks here in the United States. There are other textbooks in the UK, the United Kingdom. They have similar examples from the UK. This is not something that's specific to the United States. It's not something certainly that's specific to Florida. Forensic pathologists know these phenomena.
Let's talk about the arm wounds, if we could. Could you describe the two arm wounds, and then we'll talk about how the arm would have been positioned?
There's a wound on the right upper arm, on the back of the back inside of the right upper arm, and it exits on the outside of the right upper arm. So it's through and through on the right upper arm. And Dr. Joost has not described that it has any trauma associated with it on the inside other than soft tissue injury.
So can you demonstrate for us the various positions that arm would have had to have been in to the gunshot?
They're almost innumerable. Just that it comes in on the back, and goes out slightly on the inside, the arm off to the side. If you're closer with your arm close to the side, you're going to interfere with this wound to the chest. But if the arm is away from the body, there are literally innumerable means by which that arm could be.
Would it have to be that you were running away from somebody?
No, sir.
So demonstrate, if you could, just an example of what the arm, a couple of positions that the arm might have been.
Arm could have been back away from the body, could have been out to the side of the body, front of the body, any number of positions.
And have taken that shot.
Yes.
Okay, so now I want to talk to you, not about the left arm shot, but about the fatal wound and the arm position, okay? So can you describe the fatal wound based upon the autopsy findings? And can you talk about what arm position would have, what the right arm would have had to have done in order to receive the fatal wound?
This wound on the right chest is just below the nipple here, almost in a line, imaginary line. Comes in here and goes through the body to the opposite side and is recovered in the
So
left arm.
let me keep you up for a minute. So in order to receive the fatal wound, would that arm have to be away from the body?
This arm has to be away from the body. If you move it closer in, you're going to be with this wound here, just below the nipple on the right side. So
And-
this arm has to be away from the body.
So for example, if you were pointing a gun at somebody, turned a little sideways,
Yes.
would that open the area up to the shot?
Absolutely, it would. It would open up the part on the chest to have this wound here on just below the nipple on the right side.
And that wound was described as front to back.
That is correct.
What does that mean in an anatomical description?
Well, anatomic position is standing erect, palm side forward. So this is how all of our dimensions are made. It does not take into account spatial orientation. So if the wound here, for example, is upward from right to left, if we move the body a little bit, we change the entire spatial orientation. So all we have to do is bend somebody down, and what was upward now becomes downward. So all we're describing, Dr. Juice included, is these positions, anatomic positions, called anatomic positions. Standing erect, palm side forward. This is how we make our initial descriptions on where wounds are in a body.
And when she describes it as front to back and upward, what is she saying was the trajectory?
That's what she's saying the trajectory is in anatomic position, going upward from right to left.
And that wound was described as a penetrating wound, so does that mean it came to rest within the body?
Exactly. Penetrating, that the bullet penetrated. We make a distinction between penetrating and perforating. A penetrating wound goes in but does not come out. A perforating wound goes all the way through, goes in and comes out. So this is a penetrating wound that she was able to recover, Dr. Juice was able to recover a projectile, a bullet.
And does the severity of that wound impact your testimony at all? In other words, I would imagine some heart wounds are more devastating than others.
Well, again, you've raised the example, Dr. DeMeo, of a shotgun wound that, quote unquote, shredded, unquote, the heart. This wound in Corey Jones does not shred the heart, but yet the shotgun wound that Mr. Lubin was talking about shredded the heart, and the person was still able to move and didn't drop instantly.
Until presumably the oxygen supply to the brain
Correct.
gave out.
Correct.
All right, so let's talk about the left arm wound. Could you describe that and describe where it is?
Just below the back part of the left elbow. It comes in here and goes out on the left forearm, and it fractures the ulna bone, which is on the little finger side of your forearm. So there's two bones in your forearm, a radius and an ulna. The radius is on the thumb side, the ulna is on the little finger side. It fractured that bone.
would that person necessarily have had to be running away or back to Mr. Raja?
No, not necessary or any of those, other than to say the wound comes from the back to the front, and it goes out and is somewhat downward. So back to front, slightly downward. But again, this is in anatomic position. So anatomic position comes in and it's downward, slightly downward. Raise it up, and it may change the trajectory completely.
We'll talk about that. In other words, it's described as back to front, but that's just describing it anatomically.
That is correct.
Not dynamically.
That is correct. Doesn't take into account the spatial orientation.
Okay, so what kind of spatial orientation would there be to expose that arm to that injury that wasn't back to front?
Well, it is.
That wasn't.
It is back to front. So what we're doing in that case is the elbow is facing the muzzle of the gun. That's about all we can say, other than it's slightly downward in its trajectory.
So can you give us a couple, visually, a couple?
Any number of positions to have this arm in this position. If we're being shot at from somebody who is presumably directing a bullet that's relatively horizontal. If we were just standing like this and shot, then it'd come in back here and come right out here. In this case, the arm has to be somewhat bent at the elbow to produce that type of a wound.
And could that happen when someone was turning?
Yes.
Could that happen when somebody was lifting up their arm?
Yes.
Could that happen in any, could you come up with 100?
Yeah, you could come up with 100 different variations on how that could happen. What we're saying it didn't happen is he didn't have his arm down to the side. It's got to be bent somewhat to have that wound then come out on his forearm.
And as to the 100 number, that was my arbitrary number, but you could put 100 different anatomical, 100 different positions on the right wound also.
You probably could, yes.
Were you, did you read about an abrasion that was noted?
There's actually 2 abrasions that are described. On the first page of the autopsy report, there's a medial abrasion on the medial aspect of the right elbow. And then on page 3 of the autopsy report, under evidence of injury, there's a red abrasion on the left elbow. So to me, in reading this, there are 2 abrasions. They're both on elbows, both sides of his body.
Okay, so you're using a fancy medical word, medial. Let's talk in lay language as to where the abrasion on the right arm was.
So it's near the elbow. Everybody knows the elbow. Medial is just closest to the midline of the body. Lateral is on the outside of the arm. So medial to the elbow. So somewhere on the inside here.
And while I have you standing, what about the one?
Same, there's a medial abrasion on this as well.
Does that mean that likely the individual, Mr. Jones, came into contact with a kind of a harder surface?
An abrasion is simply where the skin is rubbed raw. Fall down, skin your knee, that's an abrasion.
So would that be consistent with an asphalt pad or a concrete pad holding a light post?
Certainly,
Or holding a signpost?
certainly.
Your indulgence for a moment.
Yes, sir. All right. Cross.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Ellis.
How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
I want to get back to that last question that Mr. Nouman just asked you about, and that was, Mr. Nouman, No, that's okay. I can just put the stuff in here. That's all right. Don't worry. And he was specifically asking you questions about that abrasion to his arm.
There's an abrasion on each arm.
Yes. And you indicated a few minutes ago that it was consistent with falling onto asphalt.
Yes.
All right. Do you recall giving a deposition in this case back in December of 2017?
Yes.
Counsel, beginning on page 10, the bottom of his deposition. Judge, may I approach the witness, please? You were asked the question whether or not that injury is consistent with being someone with Corey having fallen on asphalt.
What page on?
Page 10, sir.
Yes. What line?
And I'd like you to read beginning at line 24. You can read that to yourself.
Well, the question is it possible to have sustained that abrasion either on the ground or in the grass? And the answer is, I can't tell you. I don't see grass stains on it or anything like that. But at the same time, I don't see any asphalt, tiny little particles. So it's an abrasion. The skin is rubbed raw. Is it from asphalt? Is it from grass? Can't tell.
Okay. And your specific answer was, it's not possible for me to opine whether it occurred either on asphalt or grass, other than to say it's an abrasion where the skin is rubbed raw.
That's what I just
Right.
said. That's what I
So,
just said.
When you unequivocally offered the opinion a few minutes ago that it was consistent with asphalt, that was not correct.
Well, it's consistent with asphalt, just as it's consistent with grass, but there's no grass, there's no asphalt to it. It had to be something that rubbed it raw.
Well, you saw photographs in this case, right?
Yes,
And you knew that there was grass involved in this case, right?
but there's no grass associated with the wound itself unless it's already been cleaned up. We would expect to see some grass.
Was there asphalt associated with the wound?
No, not that I saw. But again, it's an abrasion.
Which you don't know where it came from.
That's correct.
I want to talk to you about some of the wounds. Now, the first place I want to start with you here is the chest wound. And you indicated on direct that you compared Corey's heart to Corey Jones's heart. I apologize, Your Honor.
No need to apologize.
You compared Corey Jones's heart to the heart that Mr. DeMaio refers to in his book. And you indicated that he uses the term shredded, correct?
Yes,
And you also told the members of this jury that Corey Jones's heart was not shredded, right?
that's correct.
All right. Now, in Mr. DeMaio's book, there's no picture of that heart that he's referring to, is it?
No, I don't believe there is.
So you don't know what he means when he uses the word shredded. You don't know what the heart looks like in Mr. DeMaio's book.
I'm taking Dr. DeMaio at his word that it's shredded, meaning it's unrecognizable as a heart, unlike Corey Jones.
Yet, that person,
Which person?
the person in Mr. DeMaio's book,
Dr. DeMaio's book. He's a doctor.
able to run or travel 65 feet,
Correct? Yes.
Now, you don't know what he means by shredded because you didn't see any photographs of the heart, so you just don't know.
Ma'am, as I said, I'm taking Dr. DeMaio at his word that it's shredded, that it's essentially unrecognizable as a heart. It doesn't have the pumping chambers as I would expect it not to have when it has a shotgun wound to it that is about 3 feet away.
Well, whether it looks like shredded cheese or not, my question to you is this. In that example that he uses, he says that that person was only able to travel 65 feet, right?
Yes.
In this case, we have Corey Jones, who, from the location of his gun to where his body is found, that's 123 feet, which is 41 yards, correct?
That's the difference between being shredded with a shotgun blast and being shot with a .40 caliber handgun.
Okay. And now the .40 caliber handgun, the .40 caliber ammunition that you're talking about, that's a large size bullet.
Yes, it is a large caliber.
And in Corey Jones's case, that bullet went through his pulmonary artery, his aorta. We could actually look through his heart based on the path or the trajectory that the bullet traveled through his heart, correct?
Yes, it's what we do as forensic pathologists.
Right. And so you're telling this jury that with a hole in several chambers of his heart, in those areas of his heart, you're telling this jury that Corey Jones would still be able to run almost half the length of a football field.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And the literature supports it. Not just once, but multiple times and in multiple textbooks.
And did you bring some literature that was an example of, other than the example that you just gave us, which was the autopsy that you performed on a person due to a conflict with another medical examiner's office? Did you bring some literature with you that's exactly like Corey's heart? .40 caliber bullet, hole we can see through his heart, through and through, lodges in his arm. Did you bring any of that with you?
No,
There were about 4 questions compounded into one. I would ask that it be one question so he knows which one.
Okay, sustained, just rephrase.
Did you bring any of that literature with you that shows that's exactly like Corey Jones's heart?
well, it's not exactly like Corey Jones's heart because Corey Jones's heart is smaller than a normal person's heart at only 290 grams. That's about 14% underweight for his heart. So no, I don't have that specifically, but the parallel that I'm drawing is Corey Jones is shot in the heart with a .40 caliber bullet. The autopsy that we had with the conflict with the other medical examiner's office is also a .40 caliber bullet through the heart, and what that person was also capable of doing. That they do not drop like a ton of bricks, like snapping your finger. Doesn't happen.
And that person that we're talking about, I believe the testimony you gave was that person was able to run up, over, and down.
No, down, over, and up.
Down, over, and up. Okay, I apologize. And I think you attached 12 feet to each area?
It's a raised house on stilts on water level in Pinellas County.
Okay, so we're talking about a sum total of about 36 feet.
Roughly.
Okay. And so that's the example that you're telling the members of the jury that is just like Corey Jones's heart.
What I'm saying, again, I'll draw the same parallel, is it's a .40 caliber wound, and it's through his heart, and he did not drop immediately. He was able to do different things. That's my point.
And my question to you is, the furthest point that he was able to run was that 36 feet, right?
Well, in those particular examples, yes. But again, it's not uncommon for somebody who still has that 10 to 15 seconds of brain reserve to be able to do that.
So I'm talking about the example that you just gave us. I'm talking about the example that you just gave us
Well,
about the medical, the autopsy that you performed, the case that you're comparing to Corey Jones's heart, that you're telling this jury is just like the injuries that Corey Jones sustained to his heart.
They are similar. The difference is how much area that this particular decedent was able to run compared to Corey Jones. Doesn't mean that he couldn't have done it had he not been right next door to attempt to get his neighbor. That's where he ran. If he was out in the middle of nowhere, perhaps he would have run further. But he knew his neighbor was right next door. It's essentially a duplex.
Again, and this is my final question on this one, because I don't want to belabor it. The farthest that, the example that you just gave us, the farthest point that you placed that individual having gone after he sustained the gunshot wound to the heart is about 36 feet.
Ms.
Is that
Ellis?
correct? Yes or no?
No, it's not correct.
Okay.
And again,
So
Ms.
that's all? That's it?
Well, you're misconstruing the literature. And as I say, the literature is replete with examples of people doing incredible things, having been sustained with a gunshot wound to their heart.
Okay, but again, I want to direct your focus right back to the example. I asked you for an example that was just like Corey Jones's heart. And the example that you gave us, sir, was the one where there was a conflict and you performed the autopsy.
That's
Now,
right.
You gave us this example of this man running here, there, and everywhere, and then at 36, and the sum total of where he was able to run ended at 36 feet.
Are you suggesting that we pay no attention to the literature? Are you suggesting we pay no attention to the literature in what is in textbooks?
No.
That's what you're suggesting, that this case has to be similar to a fingerprint of Corey Jones?
No.
Yes, you are.
You gave us.
All right, everybody pause, breathe. Both folks breathe for a second. And let's get a new question.
That example that you just gave us, were there other wounds associated with the gunshot wound to the heart?
I think there were abrasions in that. I believe he had some medical instrumentation, but I don't recall what all he had. Obviously, he had wounds through his chest to get to his heart.
Yes, okay. So my question to you is this. I want to look at Corey Jones because that's why we're here. And I'm specifically asking you about the .40 caliber bullet that traveled through his left arm, the .40 caliber bullet that traveled through his right arm. The examples that you have given us, these anecdotes that you have given us, are they associated with any other wounds like Corey Jones had to both of his arms?
Well, I think it's clear that the wounds to his arm did not cause his death.
I'm not asking you that question.
And also, so yes, let him answer, but also try to answer the question that's asked. Go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
That would be my answer, that the wounds to his arm are not related to his cause of death.
His cause of death was the gunshot wound to the heart.
To his chest, yes.
Now, doctor, you would agree that once a person sustains, well, first of all, before I get to that, let me ask you this. When Mr. Lubin had you to describe the several different positions that a person could have been in to sustain the gunshot wounds to each arm, you would agree that both of those wounds have a trajectory where an entrance is coming from the back.
Yes, yes.
Once Corey Jones sustains the injuries that he has to both arms, and let's just say hypothetically, he has not been shot in the heart yet. Okay? He hasn't been shot in the heart yet. Is that going to slow, if he's running, is that going to slow the momentum down?
No, it shouldn't.
So if he's shot in both arms, and you're telling the members of the jury that he's still able to sprint 40 yards, 123 feet, if he's shot in both arms, the momentum that he would use to run, he's still going to have that momentum with an elbow that's up here?
I'm not sure I understand your question. He's still going to have a momentum with an elbow up there? What does that mean?
I'm asking you about the gunshot wounds to his arms. If and I know you haven't given us sequence of shots, okay, but I'm asking you that if the two injuries to his left arm and his right arm, if those injuries hit him prior to the gunshot wound to his heart, and he's already in motion running, is he going to lose some momentum after sustaining those gunshot wounds?
I don't think significant momentum at all. He's already with fight or flight.
Okay, so
And they're certainly not interfering with his ability to move his legs.
he's going to he's going to actually be able to run faster
didn't say-
without any moving with his arms just blown apart. He's actually going to be able to run faster.
I didn't say that. Did I say that? I didn't say that.
You just said that you don't think he's going to lose any momentum.
Well, you said he's going to run faster. Faster is different than losing momentum.
Okay, so-
Faster means his speed is going to increase. I don't think I said that.
So what did you say?
I said it's not going to significantly slow him down if he's running. Wounds to his arm are different than wounds to his legs.
Not going to significantly slow him down. Is it going to slow him down at all?
It may, at the time that the shot is fired, that he realizes he's been hit, he may momentarily pause. But again, he's got fight and flight on his side. He's got adrenaline running.
So all the literature that you've talked about, and you talked about how it's well documented, and I think you even mentioned it goes back to the 1800s.
I think I used the word settled science.
Settled science. And I think you gave us an example of a case somewhere in the 1800s, is that right?
Yes.
My question to you is, out of all of the anecdotes that you have in these two books here that forensic pathologists use, you can't tell the members of this jury whether or not a person who sustained a gunshot wound exactly like Corey Jones's or similar to Corey Jones's, whether it was a shredded heart or not, if they also sustained other gunshot wounds as he did and was able to make that movement.
What's your question? I can't, I'm not following. I can't say what?
You can't say that all, out of all the anecdotes that you gave us, you talked specifically about gunshot wounds to the heart. My question to you is, you don't mention any other wounds associated with the person's body. For instance, you're not telling this jury that, and in addition to the heart being shredded that Dr. DeMaio refers to in his book, that person also had a gunshot wound to his right thigh, or his left calf, or a gunshot wound to his arm. You're specifically talking about one gunshot wound to that person's body, and that's the heart, right?
The question, Ms. Ellis, from my standpoint, should be, is he able to do this? That's the question.
No, don't tell me what my question is.
That's what the question is.
What the question is.
Is he able to do this? Yes, and the literature says, yes, he's able to do this.
So the answer to my question is no.
The answer to your question is, yes, he's able to do this. The reports that are in the literature are the reports that are in the literature. They talk with damage done to the heart, ribs, chest cavity, and that. They don't talk about specifically, to my recollection, wounds to arms and legs, etc. But clearly if the person referred to in any of the articles had broken bones in their legs, they obviously would not be able to run.
That's all I'm asking you, sir, is that Corey Jones sustained 3 gunshot wounds. And the literature that you're referring to, everything that you're telling this jury refers to 1 gunshot wound.
All right, Ms. Ellis, let's talk about the wound to the right upper arm. Dr. Just has described it as only to the soft tissues. So, yeah, it's going to be painful. He knows he's been shot. It's going to be bleeding. It didn't hit a bone, didn't hit any neural structures, nervous structures, didn't hit any kind of significant blood vessels that she described. So, yes, it's a gunshot wound. Is it a significant gunshot wound? Of these 3, it's the least significant. The wound to the left forearm does break the ulna bone. That's the little pinky side bone in your left forearm. With that bone, probably not likely to be able to hold on to a gun or squeeze the trigger because of that wound. But again, he's not died from having a broken arm. Lots of people have broken arms and they don't die. So really the only wound that we're talking about is the wound to his chest that damages his heart, which is the main feature here, which is the pumping chamber.
And so you're not taking into account that he sustained 2 other gunshot wounds.
Dr. Just, who certified his death, said he died from the gunshot wound to his chest. She did not say multiple gunshot wounds. She said gunshot wound of chest. So no, it does not have a significant role in Mr. Jones' death. The wound to his heart has the significant role, producing damage to his heart, and the example of gunshot wounds to the heart is well described in the literature. So well described in the literature that it's in 2 medical textbooks here in the United States.
And yet you didn't think to bring not one picture with you to show a shredded heart.
You know, again, I'm here to talk about my 6-page letter. I'm not here to describe photographs that, first off, are protected by Chapter 406-135 for showing autopsy photos. That's a third-degree felony, and I'm not about to incur that. So, no, I didn't bring any photographs.
I'm talking about from Dr. DeMaio's book.
I didn't write Dr. DeMaio's book. Whether Dr. DeMaio chose to put a photograph in there or not, that's Dr. DeMaio.
Well, you certainly did distinguish it from Corey Jones's heart.
That's correct, but that's not up to me as to what Dr. DeMaio puts in his book or what Dr. Spitz and Fisher put in their book, whether they chose to illustrate it or not. They described it. Picture's worth 1,000 words. They choose to use text.
So the gunshot wounds to the left and right arms, we should just not take into account physiologically what his abilities would have been once he sustained those gunshots.
Well, again, let me say it slower, that the wound to the right upper arm just goes through soft tissues. There's nothing else in Dr. Juice's report of what it does as far as damage goes. So of the 3 wounds, that's the least significant. The other wound breaks a forearm bone. Again, lots of people have broken bones. That doesn't prevent them from running, moving their arms, etc., because they have a broken arm.
I want to talk to you about your report.
Can I get everybody to pause and have the lawyers come to the bench, please?
Yes, Judge.
Here, it's hot lunch, so I'm going to break for lunch for you, and we'll take about an hour. Enjoy your lunch, turn your pads upside down. Do not talk about the case in any way, shape, or form. You cannot deliberate back there, and don't do any research. All right. So, Doc, you're in the middle of testimony, so don't talk to anybody about the case in any way, shape, or form, and we'll take an hour, and we'll come back and pick right up. Oh. Of course, you can talk to him, just not about the case. All right?